I'd like to welcome all of you to this very timely talk by two eminently qualified people, intellectuals, who will talk about the global crisis, geopolitical dilemmas, strategic responses. And again, it's extremely timely. I think there was news all over the papers and the media today about what was going on in Syria and Russia's part in that. And of course, I'd like to thank Beit Zatoun, which has been such a wonderful venue for generating solidarity, certainly with the Palestinian struggle and with the indigenous peoples here in Canada and abroad, resisting state-sanctioned genocidal policies. So this talk is the third panel organized by the Center for Social Justice and the Socialist Project, focusing on the global crises involving Russia. Tonight's talk is also sponsored by the Canada Research Chair in Comparative Politics at York University. So the focus tonight is geopolitical conflict produced by NATO expansion, which is a product of an economic and social process taking place in Europe. In fact, it is the logic of the neoliberal model that stimulates NATO expansionism. This is very similar to what we saw in the late 19th century with a new wave of colonialism produced by the so-called late Victorian Depression to stabilize the system without changing it. The dream of Russian elites is to have good relationships with the West. The elites' money is in the West, their children are at Oxford and Harvard, their property is in Switzerland and England. They are ready to make almost any concession that will not destabilize Russia itself. But the West is not accepting these offers. Ruling circles in the EU prefer to speak of a Russian threat instead of cooperation with Russia. This is all complicating the wider geopolitical setting around the Black Sea, in the conflicts in Syria, in the Middle East, and in Russia's relations with China and East Asia. These are all crucial issues for understanding the new political divisions between West and East shaping global politics. So in looking at the current crises, and that would now include certainly Syria, Ukraine, and as I mentioned, the Arctic crises that involve conflict between East and West, Russia and NATO and US. So Dr. Plekhanov and Dr. Kagarlitsky's works bring a perspective that to me is reminiscent of the work of Tolstoy, War and Peace, in the sense that their interest in understanding the whole sweep of history, the big picture of what causes change, whether change is progressive or regressive, the class divisions that play such a big part in personal and public life, the lies and real facts about leaders and movements, and the lives of real people. So it's really very rich to read their work, and I would really recommend that. So just to give a perspective, there was a global turning point, I think, around 1990, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the possibility of dismantling nuclear weapons, and capping carbon emissions. But instead, there was the first Gulf War, which was a total war setting the trajectory of total destruction with impunity for decades ahead. And this leads to my first question about the military. Dr. Kagarlitsky, in his work as historian, draws on knowledge of revolution and revolt. The French Revolution, the Paris Commune, 1917 Russia, the Spanish Civil War. In writing about Chechnya and Ukraine, he describes the refusals of soldiers to fight, mass defections as soldiers run away and desert as they don't want to go and fight and to be cannon fodder, or soldiers who ally with the other side. With increased militarization globally, what wedge can be drawn between soldiers and state-sponsored violence? This aspect of resistance is generally ignored by progressive opposition. A former panelist at the Center for Social Justice, Vladimir Ishchenko, observed that the left liberals in solidarity with the Kiev government and leaders of the EU, he said that it was a strange feeling when the army is already with the people and many leftists are still with the authorities. Dr. Kagarlitsky writes of the need to link solidarity movements, particularly Russia and the West, linking linking movements that are anti-war, anti-NATO, and anti-imperialist. In recent talks and in an article published in Canadian Dimension magazine, Greg Abel draws on the work of Rosa Luxemburg, who warned of the role that military spending, often in support of imperialist land grabs and dispossessions, played in sustaining effective demand in the faces of economic crisis in capitalist societies. Albo spoke of the interconnected, endless austerity, endless war against terrorism. Indeed, military weapons is the one reliable growth industry. Canada recently sold $14 billion of weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Obama pledges $1.1 trillion to upgrade nuclear weapons. And Russia and China increase military spending. This is one of the both of these things are a focus of your work. Two, another focus, which I think will probably come up tonight in the talks, is the intense distortions, lies, and speculation about Russia's role in Syria and whether Obama is willing to collaborate with Russia and Iran. Three, another subject is nuclear weapons, which is generally ignored, but it has been said by a number of experts that there is a greater threat of nuclear war now than during the Cold War. This is due to missile defense and the U.S. belief that nuclear weapons can be used like conventional weapons and that a nuclear war is winnable. And also, there have been a critique of Russia's inadequate missile defense system, which makes the situation more dangerous since it would be more difficult for them to detect incoming missiles, and their inadequate conventional weapon system, which would make it more likely for Russians to resort to nuclear weapons if they felt threatened. Another neglected global issue in these political and military crises is the role of climate change, which is the elephant in the room, which will certainly bring increasing devastation and poverty and to all areas of the world, and combined with the dismantling of any kind of protective public infrastructure by the neoliberal economy. The droughts in 2010 and 2012 in Russia caused 30% and then a 20% loss of agricultural production. And that was only with a 0.8 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature, so things will get a lot worse. Five, something that comes up very much in Dr. Kopolinsky's work is the neoliberal onslaughts. That Russia is a peripheral nation, that the wealth is drained, deposited and invested in the West, and that the trend of massive transfers of wealth from the periphery to the center, to the central wealthy states worldwide. And he talks about, he uses the word competent, what a competent government would do, and is, I think, really, really important to think about what that is. And one of the things that comes up in his work is a reversal trend from centralization to reallocating resources and wealth to the periphery, whether it's in regional areas or in local areas, cities and smaller geographical areas. So just a quote from him, he says that the answer to the crisis can only lie in national and regional planning. It can make it possible to optimize the resources of the state sector and orient them directly toward dealing with social challenges, above all on the local level. The center, however, will not permit either a redistribution of funds to the regions or the creation by the regions of their own independent financial base. So though the topic of the evening really is on global, globalization, something globalization in terms of the global threats, and particularly what gets unleashed in terms of East versus West. Again, but also the work that has to be thought about is about deglobalization and decentralization. And I could go on and on. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll just mention one other thing that you write about a lot, which is the role of the left, the opposition, and your very astute observations and critique. So with that, I'll hand the floor over to you.